process thus far. I've asked them to be here. I appreciate their attendance. We'll talk about those folks in just a moment. There'll be a time, of course, that everyone, if they have something they'd like to say, will get a chance to say it. What I thought we might do, since we're all together tonight, is before we begin the meeting, if everyone would stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the goals for tonight are very simple. I'd like all the participants tonight and anyone else who wants to discuss this to lay out the facts and circumstances regarding the development of the Eagle Creek Basin project. And we have people that are here going to do that. We're going to ask them to chronologically discuss this, discuss some of the participants, what they've done, some of the questions that still remain, and hopefully they'll get a chance to answer your questions as well. I have some questions for them myself. Several members of the court are also here tonight, and they're here. We're live streaming the presentation. Kevin, will this be recorded and can be watched later on for those who could not watch it tonight, or is this it?
I was recording it for Courier purposes, so we can repost it later, but we can talk about that after.
All right. We may be able to post it later. We can chat about that. Thank you. Now, just a few things about process and procedure tonight. There is an agenda. I'm going to ask all the participants to follow as closely as we possibly can. And I have some questions for them after they finish their presentations. And once they're finished, we're going to open up the floor. There are 2 microphones out there. Anyone who has anything they'd like to say, a question they'd like to ask, please step up to the microphone. It will be easier for us to hear you. Also, I'm going to ask if you'd be kind enough to identify yourself so that the court reporter who's down below me, who's transcribing the proceedings, can surely get your name correct. If you don't wish to do that, or you don't want to do that, I'm not going to stop you from speaking, but I would ask that you please do that for our benefit so that we can attribute the appropriate comments to the right people. Now, for those that aren't aware of this process, I'm going to talk about the role of the Conservancy Court. We have 2 of our directors that are here tonight, and I appreciate their appearance. We have the staff as well. They can speak more directly to what actually the Conservancy District does, but it's important to understand there is a distinction. We have separate roles. We'll discuss that as well. Now, following the Great Flood of 1913, the Ohio legislature created possibilities for counties to group together and to form conservancy districts to address flooding and other related issues. In 1947, this process to create our district, the Maumee Watershed Conservancy District, began. Ultimately, directors were appointed in 1950. That's how it goes. Today, it's comprised of 15 counties, mostly in northwestern Ohio, but some a little south of what we might consider northwestern Ohio. And the revised code clearly spells out what can be established and what the purpose of a district can be. The first and foremost, perhaps the most important purpose, is to address the issues of flooding in the particular district. Now, that district is authorized to plan, to construct, and manage funds such as the project we're discussing. They do many other things, and they can talk about that, and I'm being very general about this description. The Conservancy Court, on which I sit and 14 other judges sit, is an oversight body with limited authority and ability. The court must approve the original plan, which it did way, way back, I believe in 1950, and from time to time to consider amendments to the plan. And there is on the floor for the Conservancy Court's consideration a plan to amend, or an amendment to the plan to provide for the construction and the maintenance of the Eagle Creek Basin project, and of course that's why we're here. Now, we amended the plan most recently, and perhaps Mr. Wilson or others might want to talk about it in 2017 to address flooding issues and flood mitigation issues on the Blanchard River, the benching project, and related matters that are related to this, and obviously on the Blanchard River in a different project, so to speak. And tonight, we're going to begin the process with a historical explanation of flood mitigation efforts in our county, which many of us are aware of, but I thought it might be important that we do that. We have representatives from the Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group who will explain their involvement in this project. We have representatives from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources to explain their role. They've had a role in the process. And we'll hear then from other elected officials. I know there are mayors here. I saw at least 2 of our county commissioners that were present. I did not see if we had city council members, but perhaps they might be here. I know some of the affected townships, our trustees are here as well. I thought I saw our county treasurer. I'm not sure, but there may be others, and if I missed you, I have not meant to slight you, but thank you for being here. And if you wish to address the group here, you're certainly free to do that. Once we have the discussion of how the project began and where it is today, we're going to turn to all of you to ask questions or make other comments, if you will. Now, I know for many this is a very emotional and contentious issue. I'm going to ask everyone to be courteous and friendly to everyone that's here. It's sad that sometimes we have to talk about that, and I have no reason to believe that you won't, but I've even seen it in my own courtroom in recent months and years, and so I ask that you please be courteous to everyone, give everyone a chance to speak, and please listen to everyone. We'll listen to everything that you have to say as well. We want to hear what you have to say. And I think I already slighted someone. I think I saw our sheriff, Mike Goldman, that's here in the back. So, Sheriff, I'm sorry, did not mean to slight you. So we're going to begin tonight, and let me indicate, and if I missed anybody, please, we'll talk about that. Our Conservancy District, we have 2 of our directors here, Mr. Motes and Mr. Roth are here. Mr. Rickert could not be here tonight because of some medical issues. The staff, General Manager Lynn Army is present. Lynn? There you are. Thank you. Steve Wilson, Project Manager, is here. Wendy Yunker, the Secretary of Treasurer, the person who makes everything go in the district, is present. Jim Weiner, who's legal counsel, is here. And we have also John Gardner, who's also here. He's special legal counsel. As I mentioned, our mayor is here. I didn't see any village mayors. If they're here, I want to recognize you as well. As I mentioned, some others are here. We invited our state senator and we invited our state representative. I knew that was a long shot, everyone, because they're involved in the budget bill debate. The budget bill has to be passed, and I think they're probably busy tonight, and they're on a time guideline, and they said if they could be here, they would, but it was a long shot, and I understand that, and I want to make sure everyone knew they wanted to be here as well. On behalf of the Watershed Solutions Group, Dave Blatnick and Pat Sandusky are also here, and we thank them for being here. I don't know if I've slided everyone. If I have, we'll pick that up. Oh, I did want to mention several of my colleagues are here from the Conservancy Court. Others are listening via live stream. I want to thank the Courier for being here and providing the live stream services. When we finish, I want to thank my staff who came out and helped me set up all the tables and chairs. A lot of people to thank. I know I'll miss many, but I do appreciate everyone's involvement and participation in putting a meeting such as this together. A lot of people have assisted in that effort. With that, I'm going to turn
District was formed. It's interesting to note that the city engineer for the city of Findlay, Otto Golke, was one of the first directors that was appointed to the board of directors. In 1959, Findlay had the 4th and 8th highest floods on record. That prompted a request from the Corps of Engineers to prepare a study. The Corps did submit a plan in 1962, but it did not move forward to design or construction. 1981, we had another major flood, the 3rd highest on record. A lot of talk about trying to find another solution. The Soil Conservation Service, at that time, which is now the National Resource Conservation Service, put together a plan that basically is very similar to the benching project that was just completed here in downtown Findlay, and also recommended some modifications to the dams around the river. Soil Conservation requested that project be added to the official plan of the Conservancy District, and it was added in 1993. Funding for the project with Soil Conservation Service came through Public Law 566. That would have provided about 80% of funding for construction. That funding dried up, and the city of Findlay did not have the financial capability to move forward with the project at that time. In 2006, repeated flooding events prompted the city of Findlay and the village of Ottawa to approach the Corps of Engineers to do a general investigation study on the Blanchard River. The Corps had just started their project, their study, when August of 2007 entered our lives. Following the flood in 2007, the city of Findlay purchased and demolished 61 properties, primarily through federal grants that were authorized as a response to the flooding. Since that time, an additional 106 properties have been purchased and demolished through a combination of federal grants, $4.1 million, state grants, $2.9 million, and county 4% sales tax, $3.9 million. Should also note that it's not on the slide, but there's an additional 50 buildings that were demolished by their current owners at their locations for whatever reasons, that were repetitive lost property, repetitively flooded. Excuse me. In 2009, the Hancock County Commissioners imposed a 0.25% sales tax to provide funding for flood mitigation purposes. That imposition, that sales tax, was affirmed by the voters of Hancock County in November of 2009. In 2015, after way too many years of study, the Corps finally submitted a proposal to the community calling for the diversion of Eagle Creek in a diversion channel to go west of Findlay. The project did not meet the federal minimum requirement of having a benefit cost ratio greater than 1, so it became very obvious that it was not going to receive federal funding that we had hoped for. Eventually, the Hancock County Commissioners decided to pull the plug on any further Corps studies and took over leadership of the project moving forward. Excuse me. In April of 2016, the Commissioners issued statements of qualification seeking consulting firms to review the Corps study and come up with new alternate recommendations if there were any. In August, the County Commissioners and the Conservancy District entered into a memorandum of agreement whereby the Conservancy District assumed administrative responsibilities for review of the Corps study, and funding for the study for the Conservancy District's work would be provided by the 0.25% sales tax. Was at this time that stands December of 2018, the Ohio General Assembly approved a grant of $15 million to be used for the Eagle Creek Watershed flood mitigation. The grant was assigned to ODNR's Office of Real Estate and Land Management for administration. In June of 2019, I'm going to take a different tack here. The county commissioners in the city of Findlay entered into a memorandum of agreement to improve transportation access around the community. This involved the improvements to Martin Luther King Parkway that are currently underway. Also involved in installation of a new culvert under State Route 568 near County Road 180 to provide additional capacity for the flood flows that are happening in that area. We're also looking at the possibility in the future of trying to raise the bridge on East Sandusky Street over Light Creek. If any of you drive that way, there's a dip where it comes down to the bridge. It'd be nice to have that bridge raised up and be open to traffic during a flood situation. That will require coordination with ODOT and the city of Findlay if that would ever take place. In December of 2019, a preliminary report for the Eagle Creek Storage Basin was presented to the Conservancy District Board of Directors that indicated the project had a 2-to-1 benefit cost ratio with lower flood levels by 1.5 feet in downtown Findlay just by itself. So this would be added on the top of the benefits of the projects that are happening in downtown, and would remove 2,000 acres from the regulatory floodplain, about 1,950 parcels. In 2020, ODNR representatives met with some people in Findlay to promote the H2 Ohio program, which is looking to remove sediments and nutrients from entering Lake Erie. It's a good program. We certainly hope as we move forward with Eagle Creek, and we are permitted to move forward, that we can incorporate some wetland restoration as part of that project. The Conservancy District is currently working on a H2 Ohio wetland restoration for the village of Ottawa near the Virgin Channel that was constructed over there that was just recently completed. In December of 2020, the Ohio General Assembly approved a second grant of $15 million to be used for the Eagle Creek Watershed, and they're still working with ODNR to work out the details of that grant agreement. Thank you, Jeff.
Steve, would you like me to wait? I have some questions about the Eagle Creek project. Would you like me to wait when the directors speak?
It's up to you.
Directors, can we ask a few questions now? These are questions that come to me by many communications of citizens. The first question that I would like to ask is, with respect to the project, is the only revenue stream that is being considered would be the state grant funding for this project?
Yes, at this time.
At this time. So the anticipation is that over the course of the next 4 years, we would receive the balance of the money necessary for the Eagle Creek Basin project?
That's correct.
And is the estimated cost somewhere between 60 and 70 million?
That's the current estimate. That includes a 20% contingency.
That is included in that?
Yes.
And how long would you project it would take to build it once construction began?
Probably 1.5 to 2 years.
And has the final design been established for the contours of the basin?
No. We're still in the preliminary engineering phase. We have a rough idea what it will look like, but we don't have the final.
And is that rough idea been shared with the general public in any way?
No.
Would it be possible that it could be shared?
We probably won't have, we need to get us, make a request to Stantec to show how the actual details of the contouring would work. But I can certainly make that available.
And these are questions, very good questions that I've received. Would the construction of the basin include digging down or simply building walls like the current reservoir that we have outside of town?
The topsoil would be removed. Topsoil is not good for construction embankments. The subsoil, at least at this point from the analysis, the geotechnical people have given us is adequate to construct an embankment. So the topsoil will be removed and be set aside. The subsoil will be used to construct the embankment. What we're trying to accomplish is provide all of the dirt that is needed for the embankment from the site. So we don't have to bring in dirt from outside. Bringing dirt in from outside is much more expensive. So if we get a balance between the final grades we need to see and the amount of dirt we need for the embankment, that's the sweet spot that we're looking for.
Any thought about how high the embankment would be? Would it be beside the height of the reservoir? Would it be
Not quite. At its highest point would be about 30 feet where it crosses Eagle Creek. And then the top of the embankment will be the same height throughout. On average, it would be between probably around 15 feet. It'll taper down to a height of about 6 feet at the ends.
And would the construction of the basin be, everything would be connected? It would be an entirely circumscribed area? There wouldn't be an opening at the end? It would all be closed off?
The only opening would be where the Eagle Creek flows through the embankment. That would be called the outlet structure. Once the flow in Eagle Creek reaches about 1,000 cubic feet per second, which is 450,000 gallons per minute. So if you can imagine 450,000 milk jugs float by every minute, that's the volume of water. Once that water level reaches 1,000 cubic feet per second, it would not be able to pass through the opening in the outlet structure, so the water would start to back up into the basin and continue to back up until the flow in Eagle Creek started to subside. Once the water in Eagle Creek subsides, the basin would drain by gravity naturally back to the outlet structure.
And has the district purchased all the land necessary for the construction of the basin as it's generally currently configured?
No, we've got about a little over 400 acres. We'd like to see at least 700 acres total.
And would there also be, I believe there would be residents who own homes on small parcels who would be affected depending upon the configuration of the basin?
Yes, there will.
Is there an idea or an estimate of how many of those homeowners might be affected?
I think there are 4 residences, perhaps 5.
Have we discussed with them, the district discussed with them the purchase?
We've contacted them about the project. We have not discussed the purchase at this point.
They are aware of it.
They are aware that we will be contacting them.
And as far as you know, are any of those homeowners willing to sell voluntarily at this point?
They haven't indicated that at this point.
And Steve, a couple of questions I got today from folks who live out there upstream along Eagle Creek. Okay? What effect, if any, would this have on them? Would they be in any danger of any backup, any flooding, any of that nature from the construction of the project?
No, the water level will be slightly higher, at least through Camp Berry. Once it gets to the equestrian farm, the level wouldn't be any worse than it was in the 2007 flood. So it basically diminishes the further south it goes.
And what would the district indicate to all those folks that are here who live out in that area? How will they benefit from the project? What are their benefits from it?
Primary benefit is that State Route 60, US 68 and State Route 15 would remain open to traffic by having the flow on Eagle Creek limited. That's the primary benefit.
There would have to be, however, from what I've read and what I've been told, reconfiguration and rerouting of certain county and township roads that generally provide access to the area such as Spring Lake, if this were to be built. Has that been discussed, and what ideas do you have for that?
We've had some discussions with ODOT about using Township Road 80, which is the south road in the Spring Lake subdivision, and opening that up to the interchange at State Route, or US Route 68, State Route 15. We've had a number of different alternatives presented, and we haven't really nailed a final alternative. We're going to have to have some further discussions with ODOT to find out what they're comfortable with.
Thanks. Anyone else have any thoughts on the panel? I was gonna turn to, go ahead. Did you want to get a mic? Pass it out.
I just want to clarify one comment by Steve. There are two homeowners who have indicated willingness to sell. That's all, just a point of clarification.
Thank you. Anybody else on those subjects? We'll come back to our director in a moment. I thought we'd turn now and ask Mr. Blatnick and Mr. Sandusky if they want to comment upon the involvement of the Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group with respect to this project. Okay? Would you tell Chad when you're ready? Ready? Where is it?
Thank you, Dr. Routson. Again, my name is David Blatnick, and I'm the president of the Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group, which is a group that was formed after the 2017 flood, and the business community kind of stepped up, and a large group got together and said, where are we heading, what are we doing? And at that point in time, the Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group was forming up. So really here, the why, and I need to go back a little bit in history. So really after the 2007 flood, if people remember, there was a nonprofit group that was formed at that point in time, and that was the Flood Mitigation Partnership. That group was the one that worked with, and Steve mentioned the 0.25% sales tax. It was a group to work together to get the sales tax, start raising money, and started working with the Army Corps of Engineers. And that was a nonprofit organization that was set up by a number of the businesses in town. A wide variety of businesses that were there. About 2014-15, that group expanded because at that time it looked like everything was going to be either through the Army Corps or basically at that time had been converted over to Stantec at the time. So, the group was very essential bringing in the Army Corps. They were essential in the local sales tax that raised almost $35 million for the community needs to help seed a lot of the fund work that was going on and fund the engineering and fund the Army Corps and a lot of the other different projects at that point in time. So, when you go back, I'm not, this was downtown, but this same picture was also the same picture if you went out and took a picture of some of the residence areas in this community. And it's the same picture if you went out and took some of the pictures in some of the agricultural areas. This one gets a lot of play because it was downtown. You see a lot of the businesses that were impacted by this. But the 2007 flood, the 2017 flood impacted a lot of other folks besides downtown. It was not just the downtown area and where folks were looking to get involved in. So in 2007, Steve mentioned the Sandusky community meeting in the spring of 2017. I'm sure a lot of you were there. We were there as a business community. I was there representing our company to understand what and where it was going to be handled from flood mitigation and how we were going forward. And at that time, what was proposed were 3 flood basins. And one was proposed out of Mount Blanchard, one was proposed out of Potato Run, and then the Eagle Creek. So there were 3 main basins that were proposed at that point in time. And kind of came out of that meeting and went back internally at our company as well as other businesses and said, how does this work? Does this really work? Are we going to be able to raise $300 to $400 million to fund all of this? And that was the price tag that Stantec had on that initial project of all 3 basins. And when you started to look at the cost-value ratios, we looked at it and said, a couple of these don't have a standalone project by themselves. There was one of the basins, and as Steve said, it was moving 2.2 or 2.0 to 1 on Eagle Creek. So when we went back and looked at that and said there was one basin that really has a return for the investment when we started doing that. At that time, a couple of businesses went out and met with the Maumee Watershed Conservancy District to understand the entire process. For us, this is new, it was not our normal business, and I'm trying to understand exactly what they do. So we went out, we asked a lot of questions, and we asked a lot of questions about the reports that Stan had put together and the presentation that they had given at that point in time. So with all of that, we were kind of sitting back together as a business community. In July of 2007, we had another major flood in town. And at that point in time is when the business community really said, hey, we got to do something. And if you look at the graph behind me in the hydrograph here, what you'll start to see is flood frequency. So we took this out of that Stantec report at that point in time, and we basically said, you know, with the amount of frequency of high volume floods, we have to do something in this community. Taking this report and looking at it, saying, how do we reduce? And if you took the different reports, and I'll tell you, the first grouping in 2007 came up with a piece, and the first documents that were given to Stantec was reduce flooding by 4 feet on Main Street. We went in and asked a lot of questions, said, why 4 feet? Where is that at? And I can tell you in our business, when we go back and we look at things, I may be able to capture 80%, but going after that last 20% is a lot more expensive than the first 80. And so we started looking at the process, and we started looking through all of this and said, hey, what if we did some road work? What if we did some other projects? What if there were different things out here and we didn't get to 4 feet? What if we got to 3.5 feet? What if we got to 3.2 feet of reduction? What if we had a little bit of water still on Main Street, but yet in order to look at the value of the project and the cost for everybody, how do we get there and what do we do? So that's one of the things that we really tried to take a look at and understand, you know, that again, these major floods are impactful, but yet if we could still address the city, and that really became the safety point, could our employees get around the city? Can the emergency vehicles get around the city when we're in a flood situation? And I'll tell you, somebody who moved here in 2007, to live on one side of town and have to go out to I-75 to get around town to come back in isn't very useful when you're in a state of emergency. So that was one of the issues that, you know, not only us, but all the businesses started to look at. The next one was this graph that really kind of grabbed the engineers at our company that we were asking to look at this and try to understand, you know, where all of the information kind of comes from. And this is, I will tell you, has a lot of different bones of contention in the community, because there's one graph out there, or it's usually one slide up there that says that the Eagle Creek is 15%, and it is, it's 15% of the land mass. And I'm not going to disagree with anybody on that, and you know, when you look at that, but when you look at the hydrographs, and you look at here in a flood situation, in a 100-year flood, it's 32% of the water coming into downtown and moving through this town, moving from Hancock County to Putnam County, and creating that, the peak. And one of the things we learned when we sat down and talked to the Conservancy district was there's two ways to deal with the flood. You can move water out quicker, but you can't increase the volume. So that's where the diversion channel came from. So I can do a diversion channel, I can move water from Findlay out to here, out to Putnam and also beyond, kind of downriver from us, but I can't increase that volume. I can get there quicker, so I can make it a little longer. Or I can hold it on the backside. So we had two choices. The first was the diversion channel. And if you go back, and the reason that really didn't hold muster in engineering is there was a lot more money spent on bridges and infrastructure than was just in the actual structure itself in the diversion channel. So, you know, when we sat back and looked at this, we said, what are we trying to do? Is we're trying to flatten the curve. And when we try to flatten that curve, this is basically 100-year if we construct a basin and bring that curve down. And so in reality, what we said here is, I can't take any more water and pump them any faster. Conservancy district doesn't allow it. That's why this Conservancy district is 15 counties. So one county doesn't do something that impacts the next county. So when we started looking at this, we said, okay, well, what if we cancel that peak? What if we bring that peak down? And we just do that by building a basin. Some of the other projects would actually bring this line down even lower. And we get the other comment is, does it work all the time? If it rains on the east side of town and the water on the Eagle Creek doesn't come up, then it still works. Because, again, you can see in a 100-year flood, this was the maximum flow coming in on the Atlantic. If it rains across both sides of it, it works because we're holding back almost 2/3 to 3/4, or excuse me, almost 3/4 of the water that comes in on the Eagle Creek in the basin. And that gets held, and if you notice on this graph here, at the bottom of the hours, this only has to be held for 24, 48 hours at the most to try to get past that. And then at that point, you can start releasing it so we're not in a flood position and/or looking to impact the community beyond Findlay and Hancock County from that side of it. So, you know, the goal here was to come up with something that works every time, something that is going to be done, handled in land that already floods. When we went out, and every time there's a flood, I've gone out and taken pictures, others have. The land that we have proposed this basin to be on is almost always under flowing water at this point in time, where we have gone out and looked at this. The initial proposal was over 3,000 acres for this basin at Eagle Creek. We have asked and continue to try to work with the engineers, with Stantec and others through requests to make this as small as possible, to make the impact of this and the imprint of it as small as we can. And that was one of the comments that we gave and one of the commitments that we gave to the folks when Blanchard River Watershed Solutions was founded. Our original board from 2017, Almeida Construction, Cooper Tire, Economic Development from Findlay, Marathon Petroleum, and One Energy were the initial board. But again, there was over 40 different businesses that were behind the Blanchard River Watershed Solutions group. And in reality, we came together, and the group that came together as a board really came together with one thought process, is how do we get everybody to work together? This was not about city versus county, ag versus city, county versus city, or business versus anything. It was about how do we bring everybody together. And I will tell you, we made every effort we could to try to get together and work with both sides. I know there's a lot of questions out there that you guys aren't for, you know, as far as the ag community isn't for a dry basin. I agree, you guys are never for a dry basin. But I will say that there are parameters that you asked us to look at. And as a group, we went through and during those times and all of our discussions, we worked to try to meet and come in compliance with all of those tenets that we said we would meet. Keep it as close to Findlay as we can. I don't think when the basis proposed, we can get any closer to Findlay without being inside the beltway of 68 and 15 and right up against the community. It was keep it on land that already floods. Don't take people's property, pay it up for it. So when we went through this and looked at these, we went back and said, we think that we did a pretty good job of keeping true to the word of that. And again, knowing that you're not for a basin, I understand that. Our side of it looked at it, and I think one of the other sides that everybody agreed was clean the river. I'll raise my hand, clean the river. We were all for that. Our entire organization, all the business community, everybody was clean the river. We all agreed with the same principle and position on that. You know, I would tell you one of the first things we tried to do was to make sure that we were all on board. And I went by like the 4% sales tax. We actually were kind of instrumental in trying to stop that. And partially because at the time, when you go back and look at where we were at, a lot hadn't been done, and we already collected $30 million. We had bought some properties, but there were people out there saying, what have you done, and why are we going to continue to raise this sales tax? So we actually worked to try to get the sales tax to come off, and they actually took it off the ballot that year on that. In 2018, see here, we actually have been pretty successful in bringing people together. In this picture, you have the county, you have the city, you have the agricultural community, you have the Conservancy district, you have the state legislature here. Everybody worked together, and this was a picture taken at the beginning of the benching. When we went to do the initial benching project in the community, in the county for that. And sometime during 2018, we also started negotiations and started going out and meeting with landowners where the basin may be. And again, you know, from Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group, there are people saying, well, why did you guys do that where you're at? Our position was, we're going to go out and talk to folks because if we don't have land and we don't have funding, then how can we do this? Also about that same time, I took off my corporate hat and I kind of put on the community hat. I talked to state legislatures. I talked at the time Speaker Ryan Smith and several other legislators at an event one night about Findlay and Hancock County and our flooding issues. They were very, very well aware of that because of a multitude of reasons. And we started talking about what we needed as a community. And at that point, when I raised the thought process of them funding it and being about a $60 million project, they said, I think we have something we can do, and we can probably do that. How would you guys need those funds? And we talked about that. We said, hey, what about 4 installments over some time? It would allow us to purchase land. It would allow us to get engineering complete. And then it would allow us from that point in time to do the next 2 steps of doing the actual project and getting this completed and constructed. So we started that with all of those discussions throughout the year. Later that year, December 2018, part of the lame duck session, we were successful in Senate Bill 51, which included $15 million for the Eagle Creek Basin. That funds came in, and one of the comments we got from the legislature was, and drive home, it was not just for flood mitigation in Findlay, it was for Eagle Creek Watershed Basin, or a basin, a dry basin on Eagle Creek. And part of that was that the issues of the agriculture community and how when we talked to them was, you're going to get some funds and you're going to take it out and do potato run and muck lantern or something else. And we said, no, we're not. Here's our commitment, and we actually put that language in that it was only to be used for Eagle Creek. That funds couldn't be used for another presentation, another opportunity at that point in time.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
You guys get to listen to your first of 3 lawyers now, so brace yourselves. I'm sure this will be exciting. Taking it from there, by the end of January of 19, 3 of the parcels were already under contract. So we knew that we needed these particular parcels in order to construct the basin. And during this time, the size and scope of the basin had been constantly changing. So as Steve mentioned earlier, we still don't have a final project or footprint in place, but we're getting awfully close. But we knew that these parcels had to come under contract. So we met with the landowners and we had them under contract. And without divulging too much information of the contract, they were all expressly contingent upon funding. So if there's no funding from the state, there's no deal. And the other contingency was that they were all cross-contingent upon each other. So if one landowner got cold feet, the deal was dead. They all had to close in order for this to work. The contract between the landowners was with Blanchard River Watershed Solutions. And again, we're talking by the end of 19, some of the, I believe 2 of the contracts were executed in December of 18. And why Blanchard River Watershed Solutions versus another entity? Well, we didn't know at the time what public entity, if any, would undertake the project. So we were, and in fact, in the contracts, they actually say these documents will be assigned to a public entity. We don't know. If the county didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. If the city didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. If the Conservancy district didn't want to do it, we might not have a deal. And the nice thing about Blanchard River Watershed Solutions entering into these agreements is that if the deal blows up, we're a tiny little nonprofit. There's no recourse. We are adding an extra layer of protection to the Conservancy district, the county, the city, whoever at the time we did not know who would assume the project, if anyone. So if there was a breach on our end, or if there was a lack of financing, or one of the other landowners failed to close, and we had the cross contingencies upon on each other, then we'll take the blunt of the default. You can take whatever's in our bank account, a couple grand. So after we had the contracts in place, we began to contract for the due diligence. We obtained surveys, we ordered the title work, we obtained the environmental assessments, and we obtained appraisals. And if any one of these 4 would have come back with a poor environmental, with surveys of all types of easements on it, whatever it may be, again, we could back out. Thankfully for us, the environmental came back clean, the title work was fairly clean, and we had new legals. So, at some point in mid-2019, the Conservancy District agreed to undertake the project. And we knew that the funding was approved in December of 18 for the acquisition and construction of the basin, and it was going to flow through Ohio Division of Natural Resources, ODNR. So, after reading the 56-page capital improvement guideline, I had some questions from ODNR to make sure we're doing this properly. And on April 5th of 2019, I exchanged some emails with them to clarify general procedural issues and the appraisal process. And I know this is a point of contention. So I'm going to bore all of you with how appraisals work. How does the appraiser come in at that value? So let me explain how appraisals work, because we think, gosh, this is what the value of land is, but let me explain this. The first thing is that ODNR requires under the capital improvement guideline to use an ODNR qualified appraiser, or an appraiser has to go through an accreditation process. And in looking at the list, there was one local qualified appraiser, and that was Midwest Appraisal. So when you appraise land, as a general rule, you don't want a Findlay appraiser appraising land in Cleveland. You don't want a Columbus appraiser appraising land in Findlay. Appraisers who work in the market understand the market better than out-of-town appraisers, and we were fortunate enough to have one qualified appraiser here in Findlay. And in fact, with my appraisal clients that I had, many of them are skittish to go up to Tiffin or Upper Sandusky. They stick local. So that's the first thing we did, because we hired an ODNR qualified appraiser. And I'm going to try to explain how this process works. And understand, I'm not a qualified appraiser. But a couple of things to be aware of. One, two overarching concepts. One, any appraisal must be done in accordance with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice Act, or practices, or USPAP. Appraisers call it USPAP. That's a guideline. So our judges in the audience, that's kind of like the rules of civil procedure for appraisers. They have to follow a particular guideline when they appraise property. And secondly, a qualified appraiser is required or obligated to determine the highest and best use of the property. So they have the guideline, and then they have to determine the highest and best use. Generally speaking, there's three ways to determine highest and best use. One is called the cost method. So the cost method presupposes that you're going to tear down a building and rebuild it. What's the cost to replace a building? Well, there's no building. This is, the vast majority of this is vacant land, so the cost method is inapplicable. The second way to appraise land is through an income-based approach. How much income can the land generate, or how much income can the building generate? And based upon the amount of income that's generated, you do a reverse calculation that tells you, based upon the income, this is how much the property is worth, because this is how much you can get your money back over time. And in this particular instance, we're used to, and my clients, most of my clients are used to 6 to 10 grand an acre for farm. That's what most of my clients are used to. Those are when I have clients who are selling farm to other farmers, and the ground is continuing to be used as tillable land. The problem is twofold with using the income-based method. One, this isn't going to be used as farm. It's not tillable acres. It will be used as a basin. So we cannot use the income-based approach. And moreover, under the ODNR grant guidelines, it specifically prohibits the use of income-based approach. So now we're at the third and final method, which is comparable sales. So now what the appraiser does is they go into the community and they look at what were other sales of farm ground for non-farming uses. And if you look at the appraiser came up with 4 comps. The first one, which is the closest to the basin, or the proposed basin, is the University of Findlay. The University of Findlay's land, present day value, sold for $24,130 an acre. They came up with the One Energy turbines on the north end of town. One Energy paid $31,001 per acre. Campbell Soup paid $24,930 an acre. And the new Amazon building sold for $35,000 an acre. Those values on the north end of town were adjusted because they're on the north end of town. They're at least in Hancock County. There are 80 plus acres, many of them are, but they were used for non-farming purposes. And if a company wants to come in and buy farm ground for $35 an acre, they're going to pay $35 an acre. I currently, this is anecdote, but I can tell you that we're probably going to close on a deal in July that's going for $40,000 an acre. And I just executed, or had a client execute a contract for $45,000 an acre. Okay, this is what land goes for in Hancock County when it's not being used for farming. There were also 2 comps that were cited but not used. And what's interesting about these comps is that they were immediately north of the Basin, the Fox Run Nursing Home. Fox Run paid $31,525 an acre in 2010, 11 years ago. And then in 2016, they purchased the adjacent parcel for $58,237 an acre. Now, these weren't used because the size of the parcels weren't big enough, all right, but they were cited within the appraisal. So when the appraiser did his research, saw what couldn't use the cost approach, couldn't use the income-based approach, had to use the comparable sales approach, that justified the $27,000 per acre purchase price. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm almost done. One more thing about these appraisers, they have to be reviewed and certified by ODNR's internal appraisal. They were sent, they were confirmed and affirmed on September 9th of 2009. I'm sorry, September 9th of 2019. So, going back to our slide, so thank you for listening to my cat's treatise on appraisals. But going back to the slide, the appraisals were confirmed. On May 8th, there was a group of stakeholders that went down to ODNR to confirm, reassure, and ratify previous acts to make sure that they were done in conformity with ODNR guidelines and for further guidance going forward. And then finally, on July 11, 2019, the Brown parcel, that's the last one that closed earlier in 2020, came under contract. So slowly but surely, due diligence was going on, and like I said, the surveys, the site assessments, the appraisals, everything came back clean. And the last step for us being the Conservancy District, to purchase the land was the Board of Directors unanimously approved at a public meeting the purchase of the land on December 10th, 2019. And after that, on January 3rd of 2020, this group, Blanchard River Watershed Solutions, which I mentioned earlier, entered into the contracts, assigned all the right title and interest to those contracts, all the due diligence associated with the land, over to the Conservancy District, and the Conservancy District closed on the sale that afternoon.
Thank you, Pat. I have a couple of questions, because you're right. I'm going to interject these now because we need to move on. We're getting behind the time frames. Maybe we can come back. But you're right. I'm glad you mentioned this. These figures that have been paid are very controversial. But in fact, though, you reached the agreement with the first landowner in December of 2018 at $27,000 an acre before you received an appraisal. Is that not true?
Yes.
And then you went out and sought an appraisal, the Solutions Group, right?
That's very common. That's how it works.
Right, but to be fair, what information, what data did you use to strike your bargain with the landowner in December at $27,000?
Sure. So we were dealing with a savvy landowner. The first thing that he commented was that price of acres up at the CSX terminal was going for $45,000 an acre. He had a purchase price. We countered several times to come to 27. Understand that being from the business community and me doing a lot of real estate work in town and other organizations involved with Blanchard River Watershed Solutions, we understand how much Campbell's is paying. We understand how much One Energy is paying and what these prices were going for per acre prior to entering into that contract. So when we agreed to that price, it was with that understanding and knowledge. And the second thing, too, I want to reiterate these contracts were contingent upon funding. So if ODNR came back and said, it's not 27 an acre, it's 24. I was very clear to the landowners, we were very clear to the landowners, if the appraisal comes in at 24, we got a problem. Either you're going to accept it, or we're going to terminate, or we got to figure out a way to make up the difference that's not ODNR funds. So we were very candid with the landowners at that time.
But then the appraisal came back at the $27,000 figure, correct?
Correct.
And we won't have time to come back. I want to move on, and Tim, I owe you an apology, I forgot to introduce you. Tim Robinson is here, and I also forgot to introduce my colleague Judge Stein back there, I apologize to him as well. Tim is from ODNR, and he works in the real estate office. You're recreational, I looked that up, Tim, I wasn't sure what it was, would you tell us what exactly you do for the Department of Natural Resources?
Thank you, Judge Routson. Yes, I'm the Interim Recreation Services Administrator for the Office of Real Estate at ODNR.
Can you pull it up just a little bit more?
Is that better? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay, thank you. So essentially, we administer a number of grant programs through our office. The majority of the grant programs that we administer are competitive-based programs that are they're state or federally funded programs. And then we also administer the capital appropriations that come through the state legislature. And so this program is a little bit different in comparison to the other programs that we administer in the fact that we're not typically involved on the selection process of the awards and the appropriations that go into the legislation. So as it was been mentioned a couple times, this $15 million appropriation was awarded in Senate Bill 51 at the end of 2018. It was awarded in the ODNR section of the legislation. There's a number of other state agencies that also have projects that get awarded that they're tasked with administering. And so in essence, our involvement in this process is as a pass-through agency to identify who ultimately is the project sponsor or the entity that will contract with the state. We work with that entity to provide the funding that's been awarded in the legislation to the project. We had initial meeting with a lot of stakeholders in an effort to try to identify who would be the proper entity to contract with. And it was determined that the Watershed District, Conservancy District, would be the ultimate property owner. Typically, the property owner is usually our number one choice for entering into the agreement with. The legislation requires that the project sponsor either owns the property or has a long-term interest on the property of at least 15 years. So it made sense to enter into a contract with the Conservancy District, which we did at the end of 2019. We then executed extensions for the agreement. So initially, when the contracts get awarded, they follow the capital biennium cycle, which is a 2-year period. Usually, on the even year the budget bill is passed, takes effect at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is July 1st of the even year. So the contracts would have initially had an end date at that time of June 30th of 2020. So we processed an additional extension at this point right now to extend that contract out through December 31st of 2021. To date thus far, we've reimbursed a little bit over $12 million of the initial $15 million award. The first amount that was processed out was for the acquisitions. And in the contract process, we identified that the funds would primarily go towards the initial group of acquisitions, as well as design and engineering costs to begin designing the Basin facility. As Mr. Sandusky said, the appraisals were completed. They were reviewed in-house by an appraiser that works in our Office of Real Estate. The review process doesn't typically, make a judgment on the cost that was determined. Our appraiser reviews the appraisals to determine whether or not the appraisals were completed properly. As long as he's determined that the appraisals were completed properly, he would agree with the value that was determined. And that's essentially what's happened in this case. All 4 appraisals were reviewed and approved by our in-house appraisal reviewer. Those certifications were provided in December of 2019, which allowed the Conservancy District to move forward and purchase the properties in early January of 2020. Since that time, we processed 3 additional payments on the project, primarily related to design and engineering costs from Stantec, and then associated costs with the real estate transactions. And then again, they were awarded the second installment of the $15 million in the capital bill that was passed, Senate Bill 310, in December of 2020. And the project information package, which describes the intentions for the next installment, has been submitted. It's still under review. It has not been approved. And so we're working with Steve and the Conservancy District to review that. And we'll continue that process here at this point. We'll board. And so essentially that's sort of our background, like I said, just trying to, work with the appropriate entity to pass the funds through essentially from the state legislature, the award of the funds, to get them to the local entity, and to get the project complete.
And Tim, so the only money that you've seen that you passed through and paid out to the district is from the first $15 million installment?
That is correct, yes. We're not able to release any funds for the second installment until we proceed to where we have an executed contract. So that process, the way that it works is that we would have to approve essentially the proposal for the second installment. Once that's approved, we would send the contract out to be signed and returned, and then ultimately we submit each of these contracts to the State Controlling Board, which is a group of legislatures overseen by the President of the Office of Budget Management. And so they would approve the contract, and once that's been approved, that releases the funds for the project, and that allows us to create a purchase order to encumber the funds to the project, and then we would execute the contract, and then at that point, that's when we were actually able to begin releasing funds for any additional installments.
With respect to that first amount, the first $15 million, and that was an appropriation that would go through your office and then be paid out in accordance with your guidelines. Were there any time limits on its expenditure?
Initially, the contract had an end date of June 30th of 2020, so that's why we processed an extension, understanding that the design and engineering work would be ongoing. So we processed an extension of the contract and amendment to extend it till December 31st.
So was there a statement or a demand by you that the monies be expended in December of 2019? Or they would be lost?
Initially, when the contracts are executed, the expectation is that the project would have, the project be completed by the end date of the contract. So it's not uncommon in our office as projects continue or if they're delayed or, there's ongoing planning that we would process an extension to allow additional time for the project to be completed.
All right, but there's some discussion, there's been some, that there was, that the monies had to be accounted for over by the end of 2019, otherwise there would be appropriation to be returned to the legislature.
I'm not aware of that.
All right.
Judge, to that point, working with the legislature at the time, what we were told was, the appropriation of the first $15 million there, in order for the next tranche or the next installment of funds to come into the group, it was going to, you were going to have to show that you guys had a process and you were using those funds. So it was discussions with the legislature to say, if we're going to give the next installment, we have to see that these funds have been used. We're not going to just continue to build the bank up at that point in time.
And Tim, one final question, and I thank you for being here and your other associates. Are there any limitations on the use of the land now that it's been transferred to the district?
There are. So with the use of these funds, essentially they're supposed to be providing either a public outdoor recreation benefit or a public benefit. Typically the projects that we process have a park recreation or conservation benefit. One of our requirements to ensure that properties remain open for public benefit is there's a document that has to be recorded with the county recorder's office that essentially provides ODNR an interest on the property for the 15-year period, which we determine to be the compliance period. And essentially, the property should be, open, or restricted to some type of public use or public benefit during that time.
So if the property were being currently farmed, that would be in violation of your rules?
Essentially, yes. If there's a private property owner that would be farming the property, we had reviewed that question through our office, through our legal counsel, and determined that, once the properties were acquired and the funds were reimbursed, that essentially the private farming should no longer occur on the property.
Thank you. And I want to try to save some time to come back so Dave and Pat can have a few more minutes. But next on the agenda would be an opportunity for our directors, Mr. Robb and Mr. Motes, to say anything that they'd like to say to the group about the project, about the district's involvement, and the like. Rob, please go ahead.
Thanks, Your Honor. And good evening, folks. I'm George Robb, the president of the board of directors of the Maumee Conservancy District. And on behalf of the board, which is Dick Ricker, who is ill tonight, and Mark Moats right here, I'm here tonight to share a few remarks about the board's involvement and the support of the proposed dry storage for Eagle Creek. The proposed storage basin project is not a Maumee Watershed Conservancy District project, but it's a community project. We came here following the requests of your county commissioners, city officials, business leaders, and citizens. This is the way it works with conservancy districts in Ohio. We act on requests only. As our project manager, Steve, down here mentioned just a little bit ago, we here at the Maumee Watershed Conservancy District have been working pretty hard for the past several years to try to reduce the flooding issues that are going on here. We have done benching along the Blanchard. We widened some areas there at one of the parks. We've getting ready to do some more benching, and this is what we've been doing here the past 5 or 6 years. We've removed some of the low head dams, and we plan to do some more of that. There's a possibility that we're going to get a new bridge over the railroad, the new railroad bridge over the river. So Stantec is the engineering firm that we selected by your community leaders, and we were involved, and they've defined and refined the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers investigative studies that were done a few years ago. They took a look at them, and Stantec has determined that the Eagle Creek Dry Storage Basin is one of the most critical projects of this whole thing. It's going to do the most good with a positive benefit to cost of 2.2 to 1. Now what that means is, in other words, you spend $2.20 and you get a dollar. It's the other way around. Now, when construction is complete, the base will give the city of Findlay about a foot and a half of protection. And that's in a 100-year storm event. And you know we've been having a lot of those lately, far too many. So together with that and what we've been doing already downtown, we're looking at about a 3-foot reduction in downtown Findlay. In addition, floodplain insurance is going to be greatly reduced for a lot of homeowners, probably 1,950. There'll be less flooding and farmland downstream. We think it's good. So far, the Ohio General Assembly has put up $30 million for Eagle Creek. That money is being stewarded to us through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and another $30 million is anticipated. This ought to get the project completed. The Blanchard River Watershed Solutions Group, as you've been hearing, has negotiated for about half of the land needed, a little bit more than half, and which means the Maumee Conservancy District has acquired this by assignment. It was acquired in accordance with all the Ohio Department of Natural Resources grant requirements, and the Maumee Conservancy District has a lot of experience in doing this. We've operated about 250 miles of streams in our northwest Ohio area. A lot of flood projects we've been concerned with, and at least we're going to be doing that here too, and you can be sure of that. In conclusion, we at the Maumee Conservancy District are doing our best to reduce flooding in the upper Blanchard River. Now, that's what you requested. We're doing our best to do it. And we appreciate helping you. That's our job, and that's very appreciative of it.
You have some comments, Jim, or attorney? Legal attorney.
Good evening, folks. My name is Jim Weir. I'm legal counsel for the Maumee Watershed Conservancy. Can you hear me now? My name is Jim Weir. I'm counsel for the Conservancy District. This project has been underway, under discussion before the board, Blanchard River Watershed Solutions, the city of Findlay, the county of Hancock. This has been in front of everybody for roughly 4 years, a little more. This is not new to anybody. We've had open meetings for everybody to attend, not only through the watershed, but also public forums. The questions have been asked, questions have been answered. In fact, a series of questions over the last month and a half have been directly submitted to this Maumee Watershed Conservancy District and answered over and over again. I understand your concerns, we all understand your concerns, and these people, everybody that's up here, has engaged with other experts in analyzing this particular problem in Hancock County. Again, this is not new to anybody. In 2007, and I'm not going to quote the exact dollar amount, but there was some $100 million in damage that was caused through that flood. In 2017, there was addition, millions of dollars that businesses, people, individuals with homes were all impacted through the lack of flood mitigation that this county had the opportunity to take care of over the last few years, over the last few decades. This is an opportunity like none other. Where do you find the opportunity for the state and the ODNR to support such a request needed in a particular county to this extent? This is important to understand this. This board of directors has broad powers. If you look at the ORC 6101.15, and you all can look that up on your Google search, okay? There are broad powers within this district to acquire land and to do the work of the district. Well, the work of the district is flood mitigation, flood control, those things that are necessary at the request of others, as Mr. Robb had indicated. We don't just go out and solicit these requests. We are asked to do those because we can engage those experts that know how to take care of that business. Again, these folks up here are not all the experts that are involved in this particular project. But I will tell you, over the last 4 years, this board of directors has been extremely engaged in this particular project because of its authenticity and the ability for state support in such a project. We appreciate you all showing up tonight. It's very important that you are engaged. But again, we've had 4 years of open meetings for everybody to get engaged as well. This all came down into a few days before the last annual meeting. But we appreciate everybody showing up tonight. Thank you.
Jim, I have a couple of questions for Mr. Roth, if I might, that have been sent to me. And I didn't mention this, but it should be mentioned that I had some of these questions way back in early 2020. If you recall, I made a visit to the office and spoke to you and others about it, and then COVID hit. And I had planned on this public meeting a year ago at this time, but it was too dangerous and created too much of a threat to public health, so that's why, unfortunately, it's been delayed. So I didn't want anyone to think that we weren't aware of that. But Commissioner Robb, I get two questions from citizens in Hancock County all the time, and these two concerns I think are very legitimate. The first is, we only have approximately $30 million that we know of right now to fund this project. We know the project's going to cost around $60 million, at least those are the estimates, perhaps a little bit more. What happens if we receive no more appropriations from the state legislature? How do you, as our district directors, plan on funding and financing the balance of a $60 million project?
Well,
hope is that we'll get that extra $30 million. It looks like we're in pretty good shape to get it. Now, if that doesn't happen, the project either has to be delayed until it does happen, or there is another possibility of assessing people for the money. We don't want to do that. And that's the nice thing about this project. It looks like we might not have to do that. And that's the joy of a project like this. Then there are comments, like John really might help me answer that question.
Excuse me, Mr. Crawford, when somebody gets the phone turned off. We'll go.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
Let me ask the second related question, and then if there's any response. The other question I get, let's say you do receive the money necessary to buy all the, finish buying the land, and then constructing the project, and as I understand it, may be maintained, Steve, am I right, as a wetland then, possibly?
Not the entire 700 acres.
It sounds like it would be a wetland, but in any event, there's going to be some maintenance that's going to be required in this project. What is the funding mechanism that you envision to maintain the project once it's built out, whatever number of years? Because repairs are necessary on dikes and dams and structures of this nature. And we've had our reservoir built 48, I think it's 68th edition without any incident, but we spent, Steve, I believe we spent the money necessary to make sure it's a good repair. And when we need to do the same things, and how do you plan on doing that? Who will pay for that?
Good question. We think it's going to cost about $100,000 a year, $100,000 a year to maintain it. That's not a lot on a big project like this because of the way we're trying to get it built. But there's a couple of avenues that we're considering. The city has shown a lot of interest in supplying some money for this. There's been some organizations, I should say business and industries in town that have an interest in putting together a foundation. So yes, we've been looking at how to fund the annual cost of the maintenance and operation.
I guess I do have another question. There, especially the folks that may live around outside the barrier, they've raised concerns for their own safety, the safety of their families, because every once in a while we read in the paper about breaches of dikes and dams and things of that nature. What assurances can the district make to the people who may live nearby who are concerned about their safety?
Right. They base that on different classes of dams, and we looked into that through the engineers. I think, Steve, can you answer that question a little better than I?
Sure. The structure of the dam is considered a Class 1 dam under ODNR's classification system. And it's primarily a Class 1 dam because there is proximity of residences that could be damaged if there was a breach. But the primary mechanism to prevent a breach from happening is the design of the structure under a Class 1 situation. This structure will require an emergency spillway, so the water level in the basin will never get closer than 4 feet from the top of the basin. That will minimize the risk of a breach. It requires weekly inspections of the embankment to ensure that there aren't any groundhogs trying to habitate or any erosion occurring on the embankment. If there are any of those situations, they need to be corrected immediately. ODNR requires an annual extensive inspection of the facility. So there are a number of procedures in place to try to prevent a breach. I think the best evidence in Hancock County is the City of Findlay reservoirs, as Judge Routson mentioned. The first one was built in 48, the second one in 68, and we've not had an issue out there, primarily because there are extensive inspections. They keep the embankment mowed to try and keep the groundhogs from trying to take over. So there are plans in place or policies in place to minimize the potential for a breach.
Mr. Rupp, I fibbed you twice. I said I had only one more question. I had another question. I received recently, and maybe some of my other colleagues out there, judges as well, a letter penned by the township trustees of Eagle and Madison Township. They do not believe that they've been provided enough input into this process and project, and Eagle Township is the epicenter for this. I know Mr. Weiner talked about having public meetings, but have we engaged, the district engaged, in any outreach to those affected local leaders who they have to explain to their constituents and others about that? And if not, could we do more of that? Could the district agree to do more of that? And that's their representation to me. Obviously, I don't go to all the township meetings and the like, but if it is true, at least there's some validity in what they say. Can we do a better job of making sure that we communicate with them? It's the project the district is building. Wouldn't it be more fair for us to try and do the outreach ourselves and be proactive as well?
I think we could be doing that too. We'd be glad to do that as far as the board of directors is concerned.
Would you come back?
We'd like that interaction.
Would you come back? Would you come back to the area, to Hancock County?
Right.
Judge, if I might add, I did meet with the Eagle Township trustees shortly after the Eagle Creek Basin was proposed. I have not followed up with them, but I would certainly be glad to have another follow-up meeting at any time.
One of the good opportunities would be at the next time the Township Association, all the townships get together, they meet here periodically. I know it's full of another township trustee from an unaffected township, and he said there was a hunger or thirst amongst the trustees and other persons connected with them to have more information. And they might have some insights into some things that we could all benefit from in terms of their approach. All right. Jim, did you want to say something, or someone?
I'd like to introduce John Hubengartner. John, he has over 3 decades of experience with watershed districts. He was, again, one of those people that we reached out to during this whole process so that we made sure that we were doing things properly. And it may not, in every project, somebody has questions, and that's understandable. But again, we try to engage those experts to assist us in this, because this was a big project. This was a state-funded, or is a state-funded project with the support of a lot of people. You've got 114 or so businesses that are involved. You have thousands of residences that are impacted by this. If you take an individual who is in the floodplain and you take that individual out of the floodplain, they don't need to buy that flood insurance, a savings of $1,500 to $2,200 a year. I think that they would be for this as well. So again, this is John Hubengartner from Muskegon.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening, everyone. As Jim indicated, I retired recently as Executive Director of the Muskegon Watershed Conservancy District. It's an 18-county district in eastern Ohio. We manage 14 flood control reservoirs in our district and have had numerous occasions to involve ourselves with issues and concerns of the general public, much like this public forum here this evening. I'd like to thank Judge Routson for organizing this meeting, and I would very much like to compliment the Maumee Watershed Conservancy District, its board, and especially its staff for accepting the challenge of the community to work on this project. And I will say, in my observation of what I have seen about this Eagle Creek Dry Storage Basin project, it is a very exciting, very positive project for the community, and one that I believe is going to be very well funded from the state of Ohio, and that is a tremendous benefit to the people here. I can tell you that in our Muskegon district in the eastern part of the state, We were not as fortunate to have that kind of funding. We had to generate it from people like yourselves, landowners, and that was, of course, not very popular. What I can also say about the Conservancy Act is it is an amazing piece of legislation that has endured since the early 1900s, and it has shepherded a number of conservancy districts. There are actually 21 conservancy districts of record in the state. I believe about 18 of them are actually active. The biggest conservancy districts in the state are the Muskingum, the Miami, and the Maumee. And the act, as Jim indicated earlier, bestows very broad powers on the Conservancy District Board of Directors to act on behalf of its constituents to reduce flooding and to do other water quality and quantity initiatives. And I can tell you that from my observation of what I've seen and studied the various actions of the board, it appears that they have done a fine job of accepting the challenge and complying with the Conservancy Act.
Thank you, John. We have some other elected officials. Before we have our public comment, I wanted to ask if the mayor had something she wanted to say. I know a couple of our county commissioners, perhaps all three are here. I could not see them. I know they've been here. You're certainly welcome to come up and say anything you'd like to say. Anyone from Eagle or Madison Township, or any of the townships for that matter, feel free to come up and say a few words if you wish about this. And I wanted to say, Pat, a couple minutes, he had a few things he wanted to say, and then we'll turn it over to public comment. Mary, you can go to that one, you can have mine.
That seems a little challenging. Well, good evening. First, I wanted to start, as the judge mentioned, Senator McCauley and Representative Cross were unable to be here this evening, but they did both give me remarks that they wanted me to share. Senator McCauley said that we are supportive of the efforts of the city, county, and business groups to address the flooding issues, and we stand ready to continue to offer further assistance. And then Representative Cross said, we are going to continue to seek out the funding needed to complete the project. I'm not losing homeowners or businesses out of Findlay because of future floods. And then my comments overall, I think obviously tonight was a very beneficial meeting, and I'm glad that you all took the time out of your schedules to come and hear a little bit more about this project. This is obviously a group of individuals that has taken this task very seriously and has been working diligently for years to try to solve the flooding issues, and certainly Findlay, but in Hancock County and the entire region. Our Blanchard River, everything we do here is going to affect others as the water moves through. And I know that as someone who has lived through the floods, who has experienced it, who has watched the waters come up, has driven through the town or been unable to drive through the town, this is something that we need to accomplish. And so a lot of information has been shared tonight about it, but what I also want to probably more importantly say is that from the city perspective, my commitment is that we will make all of our efforts to continue to get the funding necessary to complete the project and minimize any assessments that would have to be put on. Whether that be the city taking on the maintenance of the project and being able to, $100,000 is nothing compared to the financial impact that we experience every time there is a flooding event. And to give us perspective, as we look at, residents that are paying $1,500 plus on insurance annually for their premiums, or businesses paying $15,000 plus on their insurance premiums, assessing an entire region $100,000 would probably be less than $2 annually. And that has a huge impact. So tonight we've talked about the process, we've talked about the details, and you can disagree with it, but ultimately, we've shared all of the information there is to share. I'm in full support of this. I know the City Council is in full support of this, and hopefully each of you will recognize that this is what's best for the future of our community.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Bechtel, Commissioner Bechtel.
Good evening. Can you hear me? we live in extraordinary times. And to be able to pull a project together like this with the experts involved, and also with the state funding involved, is no small feat. State funding like this does not come easy, and it does not come often. When the previous Board of County Commissioners evaluated this project and saw the scope, the size, it did not take us long to realize that it was beyond what we could do here locally. We needed help from the outside, especially from the state of Ohio. Although over the past 10 years we've been raising money for flood control projects in order to preserve those dollars for the projects that we were managing at the time and what we had planned to do in the future. We knew that we couldn't put those kind of money, that kind of money toward this project. So this is a monumental effort on all accounts, and all the support that has poured into it up to this point is very well appreciated. This is on the scope, the size and scope of the Findlay Reservoir, you think about it. The amount of land involved, the amount of the funding that will be required. So just wanted to pass along my comments. One of our commissioners is unable to be here tonight. Mr. Basin is here tonight, and we certainly will be around to ask questions as the evening progresses, or answer questions as the evening progresses.
Thank you, Commissioner Bechtel. I don't see any other elected officials who want to speak, so Dave, if you perhaps want to take a few minutes, you said you had a few things you wanted to say before we have public comment.
Yeah, I'll finish up, and the slide deck's still up there. I'm going to back. I think we talked here, but maybe the answer. I'll finish here again. I think some questions kind of on the funding and how it comes in and where it comes in. The legislature can't encumber the next legislature. So if you look at their process today, right now they're actually sitting in Columbus voting on a budget. That's a 2-year budget. Those funds are for the next 2 years. They live inside those budgets for the 2 years, and then again, they come up with the next budget in 2 years. So they can't encumber beyond their time. So when we had the first budget that was frozen, it was at the end of the legislative cycle, and we got that first funding. If you remember ODNR talking about the timeline that those funds had to be, that they had in their system. So basically, you can't encumber the next legislature. So when you go back and say, you know, there's probably been some questions, why isn't there $60 million sitting in the bank? If they've promised that or said that they would fund that, they can't do it because the way the system works is that money can't sit there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a state bank account. So basically what they've said is, we will fund the money as needed. And again, this was kind of back to one of the initial questions, why did we spend some of the money up front? Why did we do that? And the legislature said, show us that you're using these funds. So our goal was to get that first 15, to take that next fund and do that, and then say, here, we need that next one to start the process of the project. But it would be basically that each legislature. So we did a lot of work with Governor Kasich and that administration at the time, as well as, at the time, I think it was Speaker Ryan Smith and President Mary Oppoff explaining the flood mitigation efforts here. And basically, we went back and had to start all over again at the legislature and started in, then we had to go in and sit down and talk to Governor DeWine and explain to Governor DeWine the whole process of what we were looking for here, along with a new speaker at the time, Larry Householder, and new president. Actually, the new president's just in now is Senator Huffman, who just came in December. But we've actually had to go through this process with each administration, each leadership of each, whether it's the administration, the House, and the Senate. So we've done that with all of those, and that's, again, why that money isn't just $60 million for the project. It's, and again, partially they asked, how can we spend this and get through that? Again, I think you just heard support from both the county and the city of Findlay for an amendment or request to amend the official plan, and we have worked with them as well as the business support. So this is the Land and River Watershed Solutions support letter there to look to support the everybody in that group and get through this. You've heard, I think, a lot of these points that were already made. directors unanimously requested the Conservancy Court to amend the master plan, equal the dry creek storage basin. And one point there, just because they amend the plan doesn't mean, remember, this plan's been in place since what, 1950? The plan for the Maumee Watershed District has been in place since 1950. So them amending the plan doesn't basically go in and say, hey, we're gonna blow everything up, we're gonna do this and that. It basically, at this point in time, gives them the ability to continue to work on that basis. So, again, it doesn't preclude them from doing anything, it doesn't force them to do anything. It allows them to amend the plan, to continue to work, it gives them the parameters on the plan from that side going forward. Again, that decision to amend the plan was tabled until July 9th, which at that point, again, another meeting, the time to table it was an 8-5 from the Conservancy Court that was currently there. Just a recap that we've had, looking at all of the things we've done, and for people to understand that this isn't just Basin. You know, when we started making this proposal and started talking when Reginald Watershed Solutions got involved, this was about a comprehensive plan across the entire basin and looking at that. So it was benching, phase 1, phase 2, how do we get that done? Talking to Norfolk Southern, talking to another business. This was business to business, talking to them about the railroad. Cooper Tires, one of the few businesses that gets up across that bridge. We had them reach out to Norfolk Southern about funding and coming on board to help with that bridge when we looked at it. Marathon talked to them because we actually had a large presence with Norfolk Southern. And then the Eagle Basin. When you look at this, all of this boils down to about 37 feet worth of, or 37 inches of reduction in flood mitigation at Main Street. And with that, again, what I talked about early on, we said, well, maybe we don't get to 4 feet, maybe we don't get to that. And that's when we started looking at road projects and talking to the district about road projects. And some of those projects that we're doing, again, as Steve mentioned right now, there's already the Martin Luther King process, the bridge is already being worked on. And again, we look at some of the less flood, it would still allow people to get through the city east and west. There was also a project to do 224, Trenton Avenue, west of I-75, so people could get in and out of town from the west side. And so those were really the pinch points in the community that people couldn't do there, get in or out of the community. The map on my right, or your left here, would be with the basin in place. All of the yellow is property that would be taken out of the flood basin at that point in time. Floodplain. So down in the bottom corner is where the basin would be if you look at this. And all of the pink would still remain inside the floodplain. And a lot of that property already has been purchased through acquisitions by the city, the county, along those routes of the land that's coming through town. But you can see, this is where over 2,000 acres comes out of the floodplain and basically will help the residents in the community of Findlay and Hancock going forward in that. And I think our last slide we had was, you know, and again, I mentioned when we've gone out after each one of the major rain events that we've had, this was a picture taken, and if we look at this, this is where the basin would be sitting. This is one piece of it, or one portion of it. This is land that's already been purchased. And water is flowing here. It's flowing underneath the road. We actually had a video that shows both sides of the road. Both sides of this road are flooded, and the water is flowing at this point in time. And this is the picture of where that basin would be. And again, one of our commitments at that point in time, when we talked with the agricultural community, was to keep the flood mitigation, keep flooding on property that already floods. And I think, again, looking at this, everyone agreed that this land and this property already floods when we have a major rain event in the community.
Thank you, Dave. I can't believe we're only 3 minutes over the schedule I set. I think we're doing great. Now it's an opportunity for all of you to say something, to ask a question of myself or any of the group. If you have a comment you want to make, I know that Mr. Kramer's here. I hope he's going to make a comment. We have a microphone in the back and a microphone up front. Would you come on up and speak into that so we can hear you if you have anything you want to say? Also, there's a button at the bottom of the mic, folks. You need to hit that to trigger the batteries in the mic so they work with wireless. No one has anything they want to say? I'm sure that. back there can help him out, there's a button at the bottom of the bottom of the mic that needs to be pressed. I think it's on. There we go.
We're doing better. I am Steve Kramer. I am one of the organizers of the Hub, Hancock United for a Better Blanchard. I want to thank Judge Routson for arranging this. It is refreshing to do things in an open environment. There's a misconception that Hub is against flood mitigation. We certainly are not. We understand what damage it causes. But we do have concerns about effective flood mitigation. And the item that I'm going to talk about tonight is not something that we originated, but rather was stated by both the Army Corps of Engineers and Stantec themselves. The Army Corps of Engineers said, and I quote, "There would be a minimal performance of alternate 13 when storm events are primarily over either the Blanchard River or Lye Creek watersheds upstream of Findlay, with minimal storm events over the Eagle Creek watershed." Not our words. Army Corps recognized this 15% problem. Stantec said, and I quote, "Figure 9 shows that even with the hypothetical removal of 100% of the flow from both Eagle Creek and Lye Creek, downtown Findlay would still experience flow rates of about 10,500 cubic feet per second, which equates to a depth of about 18 feet. Not our words, Stantec. Another quote from Stantec. "However, the Eagle Creek subwatershed comprises only 15% of the Blanchard River watershed upstream of Findlay. Focusing flood damage reduction efforts just on Eagle Creek may not result in effective flood level reductions in Findlay." Not our words, the words of Stantec. You've been shown, now I'm sure that Stantec has studied that, but we can pay now to make that look better. And you've been told this evening that it works every time. You were shown a graph that shows 32% of the peak was due to Eagle Creek. But what was that graph based on? It's based on the model, and I don't know which model, but I am reasonably certain it's one of two. Either the 2007 flood, which did rain significantly on Eagle Creek, or it's based on something that Stantec has created called a typical storm. That typical storm also rains significantly on Eagle Creek. The only way that it constitutes 32% of the peak flood is if it rains on Eagle Creek. But those of us that work with Mother Nature every day understand that she is fickle. She does not have to rain on Eagle Creek. It is 15% of the watershed. Furthermore, Stantec themselves said that the 2007 storm was a distinct event, not a typical event, not an average event. It was unique. Atypical storms are what causes flooding. Mother Nature will do what she wants to do. Furthermore, we've seen the number that even though it's 15% of the watershed, it can constitute up to 25% of the flow in Findlay. And that is exactly our point. The amount of water that goes down Eagle Creek depends on where it rains. Another way to look at the 15% is in square miles. The dry basin is designed to control 50 square miles of the watershed. That gives Mother Nature 300 square miles to do with as she chooses. So imagine for a moment, 300 square miles, 3-inch rain, 4-inch rain, all of that water will go through Findlay. Not a drop of it will go into the Eagle Creek Dry Basin. Mother Nature will do what she wants. There are other points that we think talk about the effectiveness of this plan, but this is the one that we think is the major point. Another way to look at this, the question becomes for the judges, because our goal is to make sure that the judges understand the entire plan, and if it has a major flaw, they need to understand that. So the question might become, is it worthwhile spending $70 million to put a roof on 15% of your house and leave 85% of the roof off? I thank you very much.
Yeah, my name is Dave Young-Peter. I live in Eagle Township, County Road 67. So is all the water in this basin going to be released into Eagle Creek? Or are they going to run any of this water into Aaron Run? Or will all of it go through Eagle Creek?
All of it will go to Eagle Creek.
Thank you.
Steve Frankie. Steve, you need to hit that button at the bottom.
My name is Steve Ranke. Way to minimize or eliminate mowing from the maintenance costs would be to plant ground cover on the embankment rather than grass. If you want to see an example of this, take the 68 exit from State Route 15, and you'll see the perennial wildflowers that I planted on the slope from our pond, and they're very beautiful and go to the ground, and they don't require mowing. I wonder why I didn't plant all wildflowers in grass.
Thank you. We'll take that advice under consideration as we work through the process with ODNR.
Emil Nagel. I'm out on Ottawa Creek, runs through the farm. I'm originally from down Cincinnati. We got a little creek down there called the Ohio River. My background is in the plumbing industry and machinery setting. The tallest building we did was the Courier building, that's 40 floors. The California Water Works intake station for the city of Cincinnati. I ran the machinery and pipe setting crews for Del Monte when we built the cannery at Clover, Wisconsin, which is one of the biggest canneries in the United States. And I'd like to see one thing put into effect for the whole Maumee watershed. We have septic tank rules right now for our whole area. Let's put in a building code restriction on new construction that it must be 10 feet above the highest flood on that watershed that happens to be on. The same for mobile home parks. And this would, when your average depth on a house basement is 8 feet, that would put you 2 feet above flood in your basement. Mobile home parks have to be up 10 feet. That way they aren't going to flood. And this needs to be looked at as far as future flood on new properties and subdivisions and industrial development. That's all I got.
Thank you.
You aren't going to stop the river from flooding. Down Findlay right now is a good example of building a hole, you get wet, build on a hill, you stay dry.
My name is Ted Noyes. I live on Township Road 77, just a few yards north of the proposed dam. As way of background, I am a professional engineer, geotechnical engineer by trade. Actually, I've written some reports for Steve, but he's a county. So I know that there are people, my neighbors and so forth, that are concerned about the safety factor of the dam.
You have to be closer.
And I know that the soil index properties are, how you say, adequate, marginal. It would require a conservative design, probably grout curtains and so forth to make it work. But I do know from an engineering standpoint, you know, if it's done right, maintained right, the risk of failure will be minimized. But the perception of that is pretty problematic to me. It seems like they're treating everybody, if your property is on the dry side of the dam, you're unaffected. And I'd say if I go to sell my house, even if the dam is safe, if a potential buyer comes up, looks at the dam in my backyard, and he's going to say, I'm going somewhere else. So there's been a lot of comment about, you know, how it would lower, this project would lower the flood insurance premiums for people in certain areas and so forth. But it seems like there's no consideration for negative effects of how the people who are in the immediate proximity of the DAG care. So our property values or access and so forth. So, thank you.
James Loudon, I represent the sportsman of Hancock County most of the time. I'm writer of dryer storage basins and freshwater equals life. I'm concerned about the fisheries and aquatic life on the Eagle Creek.
Mr. Loudon, if you just speak right in the mic.
What is the policy for discharge of the basin? Is it going to be monitored?
As of right now, during a flood event, there will be some monitoring, but it'll be a control structure that will allow about 1,000 cubic feet per second up to 1,000 cubic feet per second to continue down Eagle Creek, which would be about a bank full situation. So we are aware that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife is very concerned about maintaining the habitat, so we do need to maintain normal flow in Eagle Creek and not limit the flow under normal circumstances.
Thank you. Also, we had, is the Division of Fisheries going to be involved with streams and watercraft? This is going to have to be monitored. You cannot release dead fish in Eagle Creek or any waterway. Go ahead.
We certainly hope there won't be any dead fish. We are aware of those rules.
All right. Thank you. And also with the second meeting we had with Stantec, Scott took my question. They used a water track west of Findlay from Broad Avenue clear past the Hancock County home. I told them there's a fixed point there at 140. Now what's going to happen? I-75 went from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, but really there's 7 lanes. You're going to have I-75 flush that Ottawa's going to get a hold of. Findlay really has an exhaust or discharge problem on the west end of Findlay. So, and also I want to thank Tim Bailey for straightening out that $15 million, because I thought that came from the Hunters and Fishing License Fund and Conservation Fund, and it's from the state. That's what the problem is with this covert operations on a lot of this stuff. It gets political. But thank you. Have a blessed day, pal.
Hello, my name is Dr. Richard Mara, and I live on State Route 68. And for the past 5 years, every time I open up the paper, there's a picture of a dam with my house right in the middle of it. I have a few comments and questions. First of all, you bought all the farmland and properties as far as you needed for that, yet you haven't contacted any of the homeowners themselves. I have met with the Solutions Group at my request, but is there any reason why the project manager has not talked to people who are going to be possibly displaced from their homes and have to try and find someplace else to live?
I'd be happy to talk to you for questions. If this is a request, I'd be glad to meet with you.
Well, why hasn't it happened so far? I mean, why were we only concerned about the major properties?
I don't have a real good answer for that for you, but we knew at some point in time we'd have to deal with all the residential properties, and we're reaching that point.
All right, obviously you know I have no interest in moving, and in talking with the Solutions Group, we have talked with them about the dam and its boundaries, and they indicate to us that they have mentioned or tried to talk with you about and Stanford about putting the boundary on the other side of the creek from our house, sparing us from having to be moved. Is there any talk about that? Has Stantec done any engineering to that fact?
Dr. Mara, I want to just make one point of clarification. There have been 2 landowners, homeowners, that have been contacted about buying their houses.
Okay.
Okay, so, I'm sorry?
Yeah, we have not.
The comment was that none were contacted, and that's not true.
Okay. Well, okay.
I'm making that point of clarification.
It's a lawyer semantic thing.
It's not semantics.
Okay. The other question I have.
Hold on. I'll let Mr. Wilson answer your question, because you did have another question.
Yeah, I do.
Yes, Stantec has looked at moving the dam to the opposite side of the creek. That would make it not nearly as effective as if it was on the eastern side of the creek, but it's certainly possible. But it's not the best use of the property for a storage use.
Is that still an option?
What's that?
Is that thing still an option?
Yes, an option, Steve.
It can be if we can't reach an amicable settlement with the property.
Okay.
It's certainly not the preferred option.
The other question I have is, we're relying on the engineering firm Stantec for all of our information, for everything. Is there going to be an independent audit of what Stantec comes up with by another engineering firm, or do we just take their word for it and, problems can happen like they've had in the past where they've had 80 properties flood in another town?
I'm not aware that we would ask for a second opinion. All of the work that Stantec is doing is being overseen by other federal and state agencies. But if the public would like a second opinion, I'm certainly that's something that can be directed to the board of directors of the district to see if that's an appropriate way to proceed.
Okay. And to other points that people have made, if the benching project is working so well, why don't we just continue that instead of displacing people from their homes?
The benching has a limited effect. It really is only, and Stantec has looked at that, continuing the benching. Really the only projects that are effective is the one that we just completed, or working toward completion, and the additional benching east of Main Street. There really aren't any other locations, either on Eagle Creek or further upstream on the Blanchard River, to provide any sort of water surface elevation reduction that would be cost effective.
Even with all the properties you bought already and raised?
Repeat that?
Even with the properties that you've already purchased along the Blanchard?
That's correct.
Okay. I do just have a comment for the board members. You said you had plenty of open meetings. I'm a doctor. I can't take off Tuesday mornings every time you have a meeting to show up. I think a lot of other people also work for a living. So yes, we have open meetings, but they're not necessarily conducive to people who do work. I think that's all I got.
Hello, my name is Kane Faber. I am the president of Spring Lake Homeowners Association, and I just have a couple things. I think everyone here is in favor and support of flood mitigation, but doing it the right way and the cost-effective way. One of the things that everybody out here has stated is they're in support of the plan. I have a problem with that because you guys have stated that there's no definitive layout, no set roadway, because you were taking away roadways, so there is nothing set. Everything is up in the air. We're not sure where the rest of the money is going to come for this project. So I'm interested to see, what plan is going to happen. If all these ifs, maybes, we don't know, that doesn't sound like a plan to me. Any comments?
We're at the point in the project where it's preliminary engineering, and yes, we don't have all the full final details. As I mentioned, we are working with ODOT on alternatives for the fact that we have to vacate Township Road 77 and Township Road 49. We don't have a definitive plan, but we have several ideas that would work. We just have to come up with a plan that will be the best fit for ODOT and the community.
So just to interrupt, if we don't have a definitive plan yet, why did we go ahead and purchase all these properties?
An opportunity was available to use state grant funding. The basin will work. It will provide flood reduction in downtown Findlay. I will respond to Mr. Kramer's comments after the other question.
It has been quoted 1.5 feet is what the basin will contribute to the flood reduction.
Yes.
And what dollars does that equate to for damages? Because it was quoted that it was $100 million in damages from 2007. So with this 1.5 feet in reduction, what is that going to save?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but I can certainly get that.
And the $100 million is also based on the 2007 analysis, but there's been much work done since then, and the house is bought, the benching and everything else. So that number, in my eyes, would have to be lower today.
I have no idea if it would be or not.
Okay. The other thing I have a little bit of an issue with is the appraisals. That, I can't remember your name, Pat, but everything was done prior to an actual appraisal being made for the 27.5 per, and then you had compared that to different businesses that had purchased in Findlay. All them businesses have purchased properties for income purposes. This basin is not an income purpose.
So what's the question?
I'm just saying, you were comparing and you were justifying the appraisal of the 27.5 with all these businesses purchasing property in Findlay to do business to make money. Whereas the basin is being purchased, the land is being purchased to do the basin, but the basin is not going to generate money.
No, that's why you use a comparable sale approach. So you have an income-based approach based on income, generating income, And then you have a comparable sale approach for other sale of farmland that's not being used as farmland. And I would argue the University of Findlay is not designed as a business for their equestrian farm. So, but I think, I don't want to get into the semantics, to use a word from Dr. Mara, but you have three different approaches. It was done in accordance with USPAP standards. It was done by a qualified appraiser. He used the comp approach, and it's been reviewed and approved by ODNR. If you don't, and this is, again, when you get to buying acreage that's continued to be tillable, then you get into that 6, 7, 8, southern Hancock County does better than northern Hancock County in terms of tillable acreage, generally speaking. And when you don't have that apples to apples comparison, then you go and look at what did other people pay for land that's not being used as farm. So that's why you can't use an income-based approach, because the basin doesn't generate income. Instead, it just saves people a lot of money. So how do you put a value on the thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars just in flood insurance savings on private residences and private businesses? I mean, I don't know, it's pretty tough to quantify.
But there's a lot of ifs in that too, because you also don't have the rest of the money for the 30 million to finish this, and there's been proposed of raising taxes.
Well,
so yeah, we may save money in flood insurance, but then we got raised taxes.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. I agree that the 30 million is still not confirmed, but we're pretty confident about it. And you're right, there is a concern. If the other 30 million doesn't come in from the state, then we either have to delay or consider assessments, but we're pretty confident it's going to be there.
And then my other comment is, it just seems like we're transferring risk from downtown to out of town. Residents are still being affected, either way you look at it. It's just from here to there.
So what type of risk are you talking about?
What if the dam breaks?
Right.
Property values.
I agree with that. That's,
everything.
Certainly there's risk of the dam breaking, but just like the water reservoir, there's risk of that breaking too, and it has in 70, 80 years. Not to draw, again, of course there's a risk, but I think it's awfully small.
Correct, but the reservoirs hold water constantly, whereas the dry basin doesn't. So what is going to happen if we have a flood like 2007, all that water rushes in?
Well, I'm going to let you speak to this because I'm not the engineer, but my understanding is that it only goes up to a certain amount and then it continues to Eagle Creek. I don't know if Steve answered that.
You're talking about a monumental collapse or breach of the entire embankment, which typically doesn't happen when there's a breach. It's a small opening at a weak point, so I don't envision a situation where the entire volume of water that would be in the basin would be released at one time. It would still be released slowly, and certainly would be a level that we don't want to see. But that's the reason we have to follow the ODNR requirements for the design of the dam. We have to follow their requirements for the annual inspection. We have to require all the provide all the proper maintenance facilities to ensure that it doesn't.
Okay, and the last thing I would just like to leave you guys with is to figure out that cost for that 1.5 feet that this basin is supposed to propose. Is it worth spending $70 million plus another $100,000 a year to do? Is it going to save that in destruction costs? Thank you.
Hello, I'm David Bauer, Eagle Township trustee. Will this 800 acres pay real estate tax?
No.
Okay. According to the auditor's website, Liberty Benton will lose $27,000 a year. Arlington School will lose $30,000 a year. Hancock County will lose $7,700, and Eagle Township will lose $2,000 a year.
What's the increase in property values from taking out of the floodplain? There's no increase in the property value from your property being taken out of the floodplain?
But those are not in those townships.
Well, there are some.
Some.
I agree. Well, you mentioned Hancock County, but there will be some offset. I think to do a full analysis of that, you look at lost tax revenue plus what people get an increase from not having to pay or being out of the floodplain. I know when I moved to town, one of the things I did was look to see whether the home was in the floodplain, and I avoided that area.
Okay,
All right, so when you build a basin, it removes flood points from the floodplain.
I think these schools are they're gonna lose income.
I understand. I think you have to look at a net approach to see how it's offset, and I wish Charity were here to talk about how property tax villages work.
Okay, one other comment. Years ago, when we were having the diversion channel controversy, Lynn Army from the Conservancy district spoke at a meeting, and one of his words, or one of his sentences he said was, "We will never create a new problem to fix an old problem." And that's exactly what you're doing right now. It's creating a new problem. Take issue with one of the directors who said this has been a community project. It has not been a community project. We've invited members from the Solutions Board to come to our meeting, a township meeting, and they don't. Steve Wilson did come and told us about a year ago everything I think that he knew, and he offered to come back, but we wanted to hear from some other people. And it is not a community project here in Eagle Township as far as this trustee is concerned. And I just want to know what gives a group representing Findlay, who are self-appointed, non-elected, the right to take over 800 acres of land, upset 4 to 6 homes, make them move, close roads, or relocate them, jeopardize emergency vehicles and fire trucks to the remaining citizens for a basin that is not needed. We already have a basin. It's called Lake Erie. Thank you.
My name's Vanessa Van Dell, and I want to congratulate the two gentlemen that were previous. They stated just everything about a lot of the concerns that people in Spring Lake and other people that are really close. This basin's going to be just, I don't know how many feet, Tim, from our houses.
Depends on which option they take.
And just like the other gentleman said, we're concerned about getting out on 68 or getting out of there in case there is a problem. Another thing is, there are children at the end of our street where the basin's going to be that the school buses need to get to. We have to worry about the emergency equipment and how they're going to get to us faster and more promptly, because I myself have a lot of health problems, and I want to make sure that they can get there as soon as they can. There's another gentleman that lives a couple houses down. He's got a lot of health problems. All these people in Spring Lake are concerned about these things. And I read in the paper that other gentleman thought this would be a wonderful thing. Well, I wonder if he thought it would be a wonderful thing if it was just on the other side of his house. It wouldn't be a wonderful thing. I realize there's a flooding problem, but I know, having been through the Huff things, that there have been farmers that have farmland along the river that would agree to go ahead and bench and everything. They've talked about this, they've tried to get The Corps of Engineers said it wouldn't work, but you guys have proved that benching does work. So I don't understand why we can't go ahead and clean it. They did it down in Dayton, it worked in Dayton, I don't know why it wouldn't work here. So, that's it. Thank you.
Folks, we have four more people lined up to talk. Once they finish, we're gonna wrap it up. If any of you who want to do me a favor when we finish the meeting, can you be kind enough to fold your chairs and put them on top of the table? We'd really appreciate that as we prepare to leave. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Bob Drake. I used to live in 07. I lived just south of Arlington, not too far from Eagle Creek. We were affected by the 07 flood. Our house sat up on a hill with a basement underneath it, approximately 6 feet above the creek. We had 2 foot of water in our basement, so we were directly affected by the 07 flood. Since then, I have now moved to Findlay for health reasons. I could not take care of the property. That's a side issue. However, Mr. Wilson talked about the depth of this proposed dry basin. He says it's going to go from a height of 6 feet above ground to approximately 15 feet above ground, depending on the contour of the land. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you also said that it's going to be between 20 and 30 feet deep. Is that also correct? From the top?
From the top of it, at the highest point, yes.
Okay, so you're looking at anywhere from 14 to 24 foot below grade of earth being moved, or earth being moved from its original position.
No, it won't be that far below grade.
Then how are you getting from 6 feet to possibly 30 feet?
Because we're going to take dirt from the interior of the basin to create the embankment.
And I understand that. We're 30 feet, we're talking the roof here of this room we're in.
Correct.
Okay. How low below the dirt is bedrock?
50 feet.
It is 50 feet, okay. What I'm wondering is, are you going to be able to excavate down to that point without blasting?
We're not going to excavate that deep.
You're not going to be excavating? Because what I'm afraid of, I've worked in the stone quarry industries, I am an engineer by trade. Once you start disturbing that bedrock, you're creating fissures that's going to allow groundwater to flow up. You're going to reduce the water table for all those who have wells in the area. It's going to directly affect their water supply, in addition to adding water coming into the basin that is not being accounted for.
Right. On average, we'll be probably taking off 4 or 5 feet of dirt on the footprint, in the interior footprint of the basin to create the embankment. We will also be recompacting the clay at the bottom of the basin, on the floor of the basin, to try and limit the amount of intrusion of the water that's stored in the basin down into the aquifer. We are not going to disturb rock. We're not going nearly that deep, maybe 4 or 5 feet in depth from the existing ground.
I still can't understand how you're only going 4 or 5 feet deep, but you're going to end up with a 30-foot depth of basin.
Because of the volume of dirt, we don't need the bottom. We're not putting a embankment on 700 acres. It's just the perimeter of that 700 acres.
I do understand that, but there are going to be points that are going to be 20 or 30 feet deep.
No, it won't.
Then where do you come up with your 20 to 30 feet?
Because it has to flow by gravity back to Eagle Creek. The height of the outlet structure at Eagle Creek will be about 30 feet tall at Eagle Creek. The rest of the basin will be designed so that the floor of the basin drains back to Eagle Creek. So it has to flow by gravity to make this.
I understand everything flows downhill and it has to deal with gravity. I get that point.
So we can, in short, we can't make anything deeper than what the depth of Eagle Creek is. Right.
I'm still thoroughly confused about this because it's not making any logical sense.
So why don't we do this once everyone gets a chance to
Yes,
speak?
that's fine.
Talk to Steve individually, I'm sure he's spent a moment with you.
everybody. My name is John Kerr, representing my mom and my father lived in Spring Lake since I think the late 60s. I also grew up there. For a compliment. So I went onto your website and I've read all the studies and the boring, the environmental stuff and everything else. So incredibly thorough work, and I think you ought to be applauded for that. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I do appreciate the thorough work. My first question I have, you talked about $60 million, but Mr. Wilson, from your own construction cost, it says $70 million. I'm assuming the difference is contingency, but does that mean you need to raise all the contingency before you start, or how do you handle that?
That estimate includes a 20% contingency, which is
$6 million.
That's what's, at this level of design, that's what Stantec typically adds to their project estimate, is a 20% contingency.
Great, so before you start the project, are you raising $60 million or $70 million?
60.
So how's the contingency handled from that point?
At the similar, the only thing I can do is give you an analogy. At a similar point in the design of the project, the benching project we've done in Findlay, Stantec's estimate was $14 million, which included a 20% contingency. The actual bid that we got came in at $6 million.
Okay. My second question, if I could, as I look at your map, I know some folks have mentioned road relocation. So particularly the folks in Spring Lake subdivision, they've already had their exit across 68 limited. You've mentioned and you have noted here in red, potentially road relocation and a new access to 68 along the exit there.
Yes.
So you've mentioned a conversation with the Ohio Department of Transportation. In the past 15, 20 years, those have gone nowhere. So is it at the conversation level that might happen? Or is there a commitment that road relocation?
It has to happen.
Huh?
It has to happen. If we're going to vacate those roadways, Township Road 77 and Township Road 49, we have to provide an alternative for people to get out of the subdivision. And in our discussions with ODOT, they looked at 5 different alternatives. They feel very comfortable selecting any one of them. Well, I shouldn't say any one of the 5, they have their preferences. But I certainly, I'm confident that there will be a project or that ODOT can agree to.
All right, so my request would be for your board then, those alternatives that ODOT has looked at for relocation of roads, could you add that to your website also? Because a lot of people are concerned about.
If it's not on there, it should be. And we'll make sure it gets added.
And it's not on there. Thank you.
I'm hearing noise. My husband Tim already spoke. You need to address the issue about property values. If I remember, you said that the north side of this basin is going to be anywhere from 30 feet to 50 feet above grade. Is that correct?
It'll be 30 feet tall at Eagle Creek, which is the low point.
Okay.
The top of the basin will remain constant around the perimeter. So
On the north side?
The entire perimeter.
Okay.
So on average, it'll be about 15 feet height above the
So
existing ground.
basically, within a couple feet of my house, I want a 15-foot tall wall going about a few yards from my house, all the way to the back of my house. And so my property values are going to tank. Who's going to want to buy a house that's surrounded by a 15-foot wall? Is there going to be monetary compensation for people that are negatively affected by this huge wall? And I notice, according to your maps, there's some people that literally will have that wall in their backyard outlining their property. Are there going to be monetary compensation for homeowners who are going to have a decrease in value in our properties?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
My name is Paul Young. I live up in the Hunter Creek Division. And my only question question is, where's the common sense? About a mile and a half from your 68 project of 68, I consider another area to put all this drainage. You have a National Limestone quarry behind the hospital, and it's damn big. And I don't understand the logic on all this. Thank you.
Folks, we're going to take 3 more questions. The gentleman has the white shirt saying will be the last question for the organized group. If you want to speak to our panelists, if they want to remain after that, feel free, but that'll be the end of the public comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for being here tonight. As an educator, and I was born in 1950, I know about digging deep ditches, and from Sandusky County. I've been here since about 2006. And I've driven in many counties as a professional traveling teacher. I do know that the river was only dredged one time in 1921. In Tiffin, we lost many people. That's where I was born. The big flood of the turn of the century in the 1800s into the 1900s killed many people. And it might have been 1913 again. They dug deep and they widened. The bedrock is very shallow. I taught earth science for 2 years in my travels. I grew up in a huge farm north of a town between Tiffin and Fostoria. I'm very familiar with this part of Ohio and many counties. I do feel that we have spent an enormous amount of money on studies. I would do it for much less and for a much shorter time period. It was the Army Corps of Engineers. I do not remember exactly how many millions were spent on that, on those studies. And Stantec, okay. A total possibly of 11 million in 10 years, is this correct? Sirs, madams?
The cost of the core studies is $10 million.
Around 11 million in 10 years? That's my recollection of the newspaper clippings, which I have stacks of in my basement. If you look downtown at the buildings, the water line is obvious, up about 4 to 5 or 6 feet. One of my many aunts, one in particular, had a store downtown that everyone appreciated. It was called, I'm having a senior moment. I saw the chiropractor this morning as well. It was run by Spade, and it was the Spade appliance, heating appliance. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s, you remember the Spade appliance store, where everyone went for wedding registries. Well, that building is gone. The whole building. Many missing buildings by devastating floods for more than a century, and we have it all documented. Okay? Have a wonderful, blessed day. Thank you for all of the years and millions of hours that you spent. Did I hear millions of hours spent, or was it dollars? It's confusing, and yes, I will be 71 next month. And I hope I don't have to live through a disastrous flood here again. I moved from Sandusky County to Flag City, and I don't want to call it something else. Thank you for your time and attention. There won't be a quiz. Thank you.
I just want to look at the perspective of taking 700 acres of productive farm ground out of our nation's food supply for how many acres of houses? I mean, does it balance? I mean, move those few houses, that's a small footprint. And the cost, we're talking about saving flood insurance. No loss of life, I mean, so that they don't have to pay insurance. Well, when farmers farm river bottom ground, they pay flood insurance. I mean, when you build in a hole, you pay for flood insurance. In the basin, we got 3.9 million for every inch of water saved. Okay, benching was 734,000 for every inch. So, 4 million versus 734,000. Is that the best way to spend to save the inches of water? And 2,000 feet of benching saved us that much. Why again can't we bench further in Findlay? Take the water away faster, not trying to hold it and risk breaking. And we see this cost-benefit ratio broken down in the details so we can all look at it. I don't think Marathon keeps their computers in the basement anymore. It might not be the same cost. I mean, is it just saving flood insurance? And also your secondary overflow into the air and run. What happens when it goes beyond that? Where does it go?
The secondary overflow for air and run has been eliminated. It's all the flow will go to East Creek.
Good evening. My name is Richard Kirk. I am a member of the Langston River Watershed Solutions Group, but I'm here tonight speaking my own personal experience. I didn't want to scare Pat or Dave. I own and operate a family construction company. We've done public works all over Ohio for 53 years. I've been involved for 43 years. And I've been to a lot of meetings very similar to this over the years. There's never been, that I've been involved with, a public works project that hasn't impacted people. I-75. The first flood mitigation meeting I went to after 2007 flood, and I've cleaned up every flood since the late 70s. The first meeting I went to, I came back and talked to my father, who has since passed away. Told him what happened. And he said, the group that's against flood mitigation is the same group that's against I-75. At that time, they wanted to go through Tiffin or Ottawa. Look what that would have done for our community. It's not the greatest thing to be impacted by public works. There's a lot of people that know it. There's a lot of people that have experienced it. I hope this project goes forward, but I understand the impact to a lot of people personally. I also understand, after the 2007 flood, standing on East Main Cross in Blanchard, looking up and down that street, all the personal property laying on the curb that were loaded into dumpsters and dump trucks and taken to the landfill. Folks, we got to stop it. There's a lot of people who talk here tonight about being against the flood mitigation, be against the dry basin. There should have been people here tonight talking about how their lives will be improved. There's thousands of those people also. I think that's a really good question. Where are they? They're not here. I work for Stantec, and we have 3 projects for Stantec right now. And and I disagree with Mr. Kramer about them being able to properly design a project. I've dealt with them for 30 years, very professional organization. And I personally believe what they say will work. So I hope this public works project goes forward. I understand the impact to others, but I do believe the benefit to the community will be as good or even better than I-75. And thank goodness I-75 has moved forward in this community back in the 60s. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We have one more person, and that's it. We're over.
I would like to know,
We can't hear you, sir.
these counties,
Us for tonight. I can't hear you, sir.
I'd like to know what the benefit is for these counties. Allen County, Auglaize County, Defiance County, Fulton County, Hardin County, Henry County, Lucas County, Mercer County, Paulding, Shelby, Van Wert, Williams, and Wood County. What's the benefit to those counties for this project?
There is no direct benefit.
What?
There is no direct benefit to those counties.
That's right, so why do they want to vote for it then?
That's the way the Conservancy law was established.
And then, who's going to maintain this? You talked about that a little bit. But right now, the Blanchard River is not being maintained whatsoever. On the outlet side, on the outlet side of this project you're talking about, there's no maintenance. I don't understand.
I want to thank all the participants who agreed to be here today and talk about the project. I also want to thank my staff who worked very hard to get the room set up. Folks, we're glad you came. We needed to hear from all of you. If you guys in the future